Everyone, Holly and I are back. We have some interesting research that we've been looking into, connecting some interesting dots with X from that we've been looking into connecting. Goodness, I didn't mute my YouTube. Sorry about that, folks. I seem to do that way too much. I need a checklist where I mark that off each week. Jeez. So, there's been a lot of talk. Bill Gates came out in March talking about this new disease X about to sweep the globe, and it could kill 40% of the population. He's investing all of this money into vaccines and vaccine quote-unquote research, and, it's amazing. Bill Gates, this computer tech wizard's ability to predict the future just 3 months into the future on this disease outbreak and all of this stuff. So Holly and I wanted to do a show on this, and this is going to be sort of a platform to launch a new series of research into the Royal Society and some things that Holly and I have been discovering there on our Salem research. And the Royal Society and Salem and Harvard are intricately connected. So anyway, Holly, thanks for joining me tonight. Holly's in Maine tonight. She's not with me here in California. So Holly, good to have you again.
Yeah, so we've been talking about, I mentioned on my channel, I think over a month ago, there were some articles that came out about Bill Gates Foundation. He launched a project he gave a lecture in Massachusetts talking about how a new disease could kill over 30 million people in 6 months. So he launched a $12 million project to help find a universal flu vaccine that he wants to put forward with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he says that it's on the anniversary of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. And so I just thought it was kind of strange. They're calling it disease X that could wipe out all these people at the 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu. So it's all just very convenient that we have like this new pandemic coming out on the 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu, and they're calling it disease X. So Jan wanted to talk about all the different ways that the letter X is used to signify events and programs, if you will.
Now, way back in 2012, August 28, 2012, I released this article here that I'm showing on the screen. How Darwin, Huxley, and the Esalen Institute launched the 2012 and psychedelic revolutions and began one of the largest mind control operations in history. And so I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs here so that, people can read it on the screen there as well. Hopefully it's large enough for you. But so my investigation into Thomas Henry Huxley's background, grandfather to Aldous and Julian Huxley, reveals him as the key promoter of Darwin's theories, who was his friend and teacher. And through Huxley's X Club, they created academics who would promote Darwin's ideas. Not coincidentally, spin-offs of the X Club include the X-Men comic series on eugenics and evolution, the Fourth World comics on mind control by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the Fourth World being tied to the UN's Agenda 21 and the Unsaid Fourth World Wilderness Conference or the Battle for the Mind conferences. And I interviewed, I forget his name now, years ago. I did a show on Unsaid with the guy who did that video. For those of you who have access to the show archives on the logosmedia.com website. And continuing on, my feeling is that the word X for MDMA is directly related, X-Files, possibly many others. Later, Julian Huxley would take up his grandfather's stance in promoting Darwin's theory, eugenics and humanism, etc., publishing nearly a dozen books on these topics. Aldous would follow suit via his novels. On contemplating the idea of why Thomas Huxley would name his club the X Club, that was used to promote Darwin's theories and eugenics, it hadn't originally occurred to me that I had done a lot of research on the topic of X in my first book. And in that book, I had written, X marks the spot. It is common symbolic usage. In fact, it is universal symbolism. The mark is associated with the perfect man in Psalms 37:37. Mark the perfect man, and behold the upright, for the end of man is peace. The mark of the archetypal perfect man is the cross. The cross is an upright X. In Ezekiel, a mark is set upon the foreheads of selected men in Jerusalem, and all other men, women, and children are to be slaughtered. Ezekiel 9:6. Slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, and women. And of course, this is from the Old Testament. You know, for those of you who question things, how could they say these things? This isn't Christianity. This is the Old Testament. But come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. So they went through and they slaughtered all of these people. And then continuing on, the irony here is twofold, that Thomas Huxley and Darwin are using a biblical reference for the club in which they promote Darwin's ideas, and two, their plan for eugenics is now laid bare for all to see. So now, the idea of X and all this, sorry, I'm just pulling up Windows and all. The idea of X is deep, and in the show notes for tonight's show, I put a number of things under there that we can talk about. And we, as we were putting the notes together, we started realizing more of these connections and how they connect in. You want to jump in there?
It would be cool to see if anyone in the chat, we've got 58 people watching right now, and if people want to hit the like button or send a super chat, but also if you want to think of all the different ways that the letter X is used in popular culture, we came up with a little bit of a list recently, but there's so many different ways. And yeah, I just recently heard of the X Club, so pushing forward natural selection, that group started by Thomas Henry Huxley. And then if you think about in modern pop culture, there's all the X-Men series. It's a hugely popular film series. All the X-Men films have been made since I was a teenager. They're still coming out like all the time. And I guess they're in one of the X-Men comics. There's a series from 1993 to 2001 that talks about the legacy virus. And of course, the X-Men are like these genetically superior individuals. And so they talk about sometimes the villains in X-Men series are trying to make a virus, like a disease, to wipe out a lot of the population. That's a big part of the series. So
right, and that's a popular theme with all of the comics. The idea with comic books in general and comics in general is to make the hero out there and something other that you can't attain, rather than realizing it's about yourself and living in truth and logos, etc. So that's what they're trying to take people away from. And we have Planet X. There was the X-Files, Generation X, X-Rated, X-Ray, X-Factor, X-Chromosomes. How about Xbox? That's a Bill Gates product. That's Microsoft. OS X, that's Apple. Windows X, or Windows 10. Okay, that's Bill Gates again. X marks the spot. X for a signature. X for the Roman numeral 10. X for Christ. SpaceX for Elon Musk's space program. And then right before the show started, I was thinking about the Royal Society and all of this, because, of course, Thomas Henry Huxley, Julian Huxley were presidents of the Royal Society. The Royal Society, any time that there is, as Holly and I have been discovering through our research on Salem, and as we dig through all these books, every time the Royal Society is involved somewhere, you end up with a plague and a genocide of tons of people. As it turns out, when was it? Was it this week that Elon Musk was brought into the Royal Society?
This year, I just looked at the 2018 list of inductees into the Fellows of the Royal Society. I think they put FRS next to people's names, and Elon Musk was just added as a 2018 inductee. And yes,
Wow.
He has the SpaceX program, and he's in the news all the time. As he's one of their, along with Dawkins or some other, he's like one of the celebrities that they put in.
And of course, Dawkins was out there back in the day promoting someone that I used to work with, and that's a major red flag now in hindsight. Wow, how did I miss that? And of course, Dawkins is out now promoting cannibalism and this sort of degeneracy. But what we find is that, since the Royal Society was created, in the 1640s, 1650s? Do you remember exactly? It's in our book notes. But since then, the Royal Society, and wow, thank you, Anthony, for the $20 donation. Much appreciated. Thanks, everyone, for your donations. We also, by the way, have a new Patreon account. If you click on the little eye logo up at the top of the video screen there, it'll take you to the Patreon link. Or
I'm just gonna give this to your viewers too. I have a PO box too. If anyone wants to send me a postcard, that's what I do when people send me anything in the mail. I send out postcards. So. And
I love mail donations as well. But and Holly and I are really working together on all of this. But so it's this whole thing on the X and what it is so important. And when we begin to see it, it's constantly associated with degeneracy, the X generation, X-rated, Xbox, these things like video games have been really used to dumb people down. And and I've exposed extensively on my show how so much of these things have led to degeneracy over the last 5-7 years on the formerly Gnostic Media podcast. So what I discovered just before we started the show, though, as I was thinking about it, what ties and X is formerly, that's a little bit different than X, D Young there.
I think about that though too. If you're talking about generation, people talk about all their exes, X family or whatever.
That would be all of your failures in your past. So I guess maybe you're right, because it's about the failure or the fall of society essentially. But so what I was thinking before the show is, how is X tied to the Royal Society? And so it hit me, well, royal, that's a king, and king is Rex. And so then I pull it up, and sure enough, we get this hit. X is dead, long live X. People have heard the king is dead, long live the king. And king, Rex, they take the X, and that's the symbol of the king, for REX, and so then you have the X Club, the King Club. So I may have even been, it may be a multi-layer in that article that I showed at the beginning of the show, not just the biblical reference, but a reference to the king and the genocide that they were committing and all of this stuff as well. So, here we have these Royal Society members. Our research on Salem and the whole history there is revealing that every time the Puritans and some of the Moranos, etc., showed up somewhere, just before they showed up, like when Cortez showed up, for instance, in Mexica and in Central America to conquer Mexico, before they attacked, there was, and this is found in the Florentine Codex, which I showed a few weeks ago. You can find it in book 12, which is the last book, The War. And it shows in there that a plague swept over and killed, of smallpox, and killed a good portion of the population before Cortez's men ever went in. Today, Hawley discovered that in 1620, before the settlers, before the colonialists settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there was a plague in 1620 that wiped out a large portion of the population. We saw that with the Pequots. We saw a plague sweeping Europe that killed 60 to 70 million people with the Black Plague or the Black Death. And what we're realizing is that these are done intentionally, or highly likely done intentionally, and that the witch's cauldron is a symbol, one of the symbols, and Holly and I have discovered more, which it's too much to go into tonight. We can cover that in the rest of the shows we do on the Royal Society. But what were you wanted to say?
I'll let you finish this. Go ahead.
All right, and I just lost my train of thought, so...
Okay. Well, I just do you want to tie this back into X or?
Well, yeah. So where I'm going with all of this is all of these plagues have happened. They're tied to the Royal Society, the X Club, which is founded by Thomas Henry Huxley to promote Darwin theories. It's the Royal Club, the Royal Society, the X Club, and then we now have the disease X being promoted by Bill Gates, etc., and his uncanny ability to predict the future, etc. But again, these plagues appear, the witch's cauldron, all of this stuff, the symbolism that we've been given appears to be the symbol of creating brews that caused genocide or plagues. And then if we think about it, what is a plague? It's a strike, and it's like a military strike. Did you have something to add there?
No.
So, that was my theory behind that anyway, is that the plagues are being intentionally manufactured, and it's the same then now. What I also am beginning to think is that the reason why so-called plagues have been disappearing historically is that they have... in general, abandoned plagues for vaccines. Now, if you look at the witch's brew and what they put into it, they put in mercury, they put in animal parts, human parts, feces, poisons, all these nasty things. Well, that eventually morphs into inoculations and then into vaccines. And that may sound far-fetched or conspiratorial right now, but I think as we look into this more and more, it's going to flush out. And then you have basically the modern vaccine industry is really the witchcraft brew industry, if that, doesn't sound too outrageous. Holly?
So getting back to the X Club and the Royal Society, we have so the X Club was there to promote a new form of the Royal Society. So it was a group of men similar to the founding of the Royal Society, where it started off as as a club. I think it was originally at Gresham Hall or something.
Correct.
Like that. And then it's from there in the mid 1800s. It first started with the X Club, which is a dining club of members of the Royal Society. And they wanted to create a new section of the Royal Society with a devotion to science, pure and free, untrammeled by religious dogmas. So the Royal Society, the X Club, started up was some influence to the X-Men series that started in 1963 by Stan Lee, who's a very famous comic artist. And it was the X-Men were created and put forward by Charles Xavier, also known as Professor X. And he had his own hall, his own place where all of the X-Men went to, all these mutants with superhuman abilities, and he called them his his X-Men. They had telepathy, etc. It was his school at Xavier Academy was a private school in Salem Center. And there's a famous villain in X-Men, one of the series, called the Leper Queen. And she was a mutant, and she wanted to kill other mutants, and she was also spreading disease. So there's a lot of talk about disease spreading. There's a mutant called Fever Pitch. There's a X-23, the Leper Queen, as I said, Ecstatics. So it's kind of interesting. People think a lot of this is just a coincidence, but there's an incident called the day after M Day. The Leper Queen attacked the Xavier Institute with the Sapien League. So she has like these monkeys that go and attack the X-Men, the superhumans. So this series is massive. They're making like a new film like at least once a year. So it's kind of interesting to see the parallels here between the X Club, which was started up by the Huxleys and the Royal Society, and their promotion of a new form of science completely separate from religion. But in the meantime, creating this, new religion. I've argued before, scientism, the way that people promote scientism without the scientific inquiry aspect of it, and without, the trivium, it becomes a religion in and of itself.
And the Royal Society created the peer review system, which is a closed-loop system. And then when we get into the history of, and I'm just going to pull this up, of the X Club, we can see that the X Club, with Thomas Henry Huxley, etc., what they had was, eight or nine academics that then went into universities around the world, and they created, for those of you who have read my article, Spies in Academic Clothing, they created an academic cell, and then they got into high positions in universities, in key positions in key universities, and then they promoted this Darwin's theories, and at the same time, the Royal Society, and they're all Royal Society members, the key aim was they claimed to reform the Royal Society, but I don't believe that, unless, one theory I have with that is that these guys would meet just before they walked into the meetings of the Royal Society to steer the Royal Society in the direction that they wanted each time. But of course, Thomas Huxley was the president, so were other members of the Royal Society, or from the X Club of the Royal Society as well. So you have this connection with the Royal Society, them controlling the information, and then this peer review system created by the Royal Society, which keeps out any dissenting views, and it creates a closed loop system where then they, via the Royal Society, control the so-called scientific dialogue. And it's really scientism, whereas Holly just pointed out it's more of a religion in many instances. Okay, there have been some advances, but when we look into a lot of this stuff, a lot of the so-called science that they put forth is fake. And then because the Royal Society is tied with all of these massacres and eugenics apparently in Harvard, they use this smokescreen to cover it all up.
So, yeah, I just think it's interesting. There's a lot of people know about the SpaceX program, and they have been getting lots of contracts to shoot off all these rockets into space, and they're supposed to be, a separate private company, separate from NASA, and it says on their website that, their mission is to launch advanced rockets and spacecraft founded in 2002 to revolutionize space technology. And so it's kind of interesting. Trump is talking about kind of restructuring NASA as well. And so we'll just have to wait and see where this goes with the SpaceX X program, if all this is going to be like NASA's going to be privatized, or how is SpaceX going to continue to grow? Especially, we'll have to see how this goes now that Elon Musk is a member of the Royal Society now too.
Now, what I wanted to do is read a quote. I'm just looking for it here, from Neil Whitehead, who is a famous professor of anthropology at University of Wisconsin Madison. And let me see if I can find him here. If you can pick it up for a second while I just look for this.
Someone put in the chat the TEDx talks, and I think that's a great instance or great example of like the scientism and having like a set of, basically like Yana said before, like an academic cell. So you have like the people, the propagandists who put forward the acceptable science, or they will create mixed controversies or fake controversies within these TED Talks to try to put forward certain aspects of what is acceptable science and what is considered fringe science. And if you ask me, pretty much all the TED Talks are pretty mainstream, and I'm pretty sick of them, honestly. I'm glad that fad is kind of over. But good connection there with science and X there.
I used to watch the TED shows years ago, and then they came out with this TEDx thing, and it was basically people who didn't even have a little bit of, solid background in their theories. There was this guy who contacted me originally, and he wanted to come on my show. And I read his research and everything, and I didn't want him on. His first name, I believe, was Randy. And I didn't want to have him on. I didn't think his research was sound. And it wasn't more than maybe 5 days or maybe 2 weeks later, suddenly he was on the TEDx show promoting this whole theory that I told him I thought had too many flaws and wasn't sound enough. So, in this interview that I did with Neil Whitehead, I'll just show it here on screen. And this was originally in a huge book project that I was working on. And so in the early days of the show, I had interviewed many dozens of famous ethnobotanists and anthropologists, etc. But so he gets in and he talks about how, in this interview, how there is no separation from healing because of the understanding of physiology and the practices of ritual killing, etc. So, Neil Whitehead was an expert in the kinema from Guyana, and he was, in fact, a victim of of poisoning from these people. But he points out in this interview that I did with him, I think it was, in fact, it's so, the interview is so old. In fact, I did it on November 12, 2008. So that's like the third show, or one of the very first shows I ever did back like 800,000 shows ago. And but he points out there is no separation between the arts of killing and the arts of healing. And so if you understand these viruses and all of these things that these people are using, you're going to have an understanding of both aspects of how to kill and how to heal people. So, are we supposed to just take it at face value that this computer tech guy's turned sudden virus expert and going around giving lectures on viruses doesn't have a deeper agenda behind this?
So you're talking about Disease X?
Yeah, correct. Bringing it back to Disease X.
Okay, yeah. So if you look in the mainstream news right now, they're saying this is according to the Telegraph. So they're talking about it a lot in UK news right now. The Telegraph has an article called "Beware Disease X, the Mystery Killer Keeping Scientists Awake at Night." So the World Health Organization has convened an expert committee at its Geneva headquarters to consider the unthinkable. So they're trying to identify pathogens with the potential to spread and kill millions. and they say they have no countermeasures available. And this is the third time, this came out in March, that the committee has, which is consisting of leading virologists, bacteriologists, and infectious disease experts, had met to consider diseases with epidemic or pandemic potential. So I just wanted to mention that I've done a couple of videos on my channel about people in the CDC. There was a Dr. Cunningham that was recently found dead. He was had been working on with the CDC. He had worked on the Ebola virus, the Zika virus, and he went missing several months ago, and he was found dead in a small pool of water. They said that he drowned, and the rumor is that he was online talking about how the flu vaccine this year was highly inefficient, and in fact questionable. And so this Timothy Cunningham, a 35-year-old marathon runner, was found dead in a pool after supposedly talking about how the CDC had been doing some pretty sketchy work with the Zika, Ebola, and the flu vaccine this past year. So just some thoughts on that as well.
Now, John asks, when I say eugenics, do I really mean dysgenics? The two are really tied together. You got to realize that one group, that's primarily the Huxleys and Darwin and all of these guys. When they talk about eugenics, they are uplifting themselves. And let's say if you have in the concept of alchemy and you're turning a base metal into gold, let's say, you want to strip away all of the crap for the gold to come out and raise to the surface. And so all of the crap, in their opinion, in the elite's opinion, in the oligarch's opinion, we're the crap, and then they're the gold that they're lifting up to the top. So those going up would be the eugenics, and those being flushed out and killed off would be suffering the dysgenics of that. So it depends on what angle that you are looking at it and understanding it from. It is eugenics for them. It is dysgenics for the regular population and those who fall for all of this stuff. I hope that helps explain that.
Jan, could you talk a bit about Planet X?
I don't really know much about Planet X. It seems like it was tied to Nibiru, and here I could pull it up. I think, who was that guy that came out with the whole fake theory back then?
Zachariah Sitchin.
Zachariah Sitchin, and he was proved a fraud over and over and over and over again. And, he was I forget where he was from. He was a Jewish scholar out of, I don't remember where. But, so, there's all these Nibiru Planet X updates and stuff out there, and you can get into you can get into all of this stuff out there. But, he's been proved repeatedly to have been a fraud. And let's see if I have him in the database here. Let's just check that. And by the way, folks, please support the show. And if you can, we really appreciate all your help. Let's see if I have Sitchin in here. Come on. Zachariah Sitchin, there we go. So, I have him marked as agent or asset, Park Street Press, Summer Sumerian Take tablets. He's really a big promoter behind the UFO, I think, in my opinion, PSYOP. Holly and I, a few weeks ago, we went by the Betty and Barney Hill site and got some photos over there. But Sitchin was also behind this idea of ancient aliens and reptilians and all of this stuff that was then picked up by David Icke and promoted. And, of course, David Icke promotes Annie Besant's material and a lot of that. I think, in my opinion, that's likely a limited hangout as well. But, so Sitchin wasn't really, first you have to prove that, reptilians exist and aliens exist before you write books that say that, all of this other stuff is real and Planet X and all of this stuff. Maybe there's evidence for it. The people out there reporting on it, etc., are pretty sketchy. Guys like Jordan Maxwell kind of promote these ideas, and he was on the U.S. government's website let me see if I can find it, Federal Trade Commission. You can look that up, and not very good stuff. And here we go. Jordan Maxwell, or Russell Pine, a.k.a. Jordan Maxwell. And he was found guilty, I believe, of fraud. So that's, that's who promotes all of this kind of stuff. So it's kind of, the people behind that are pretty sketchy.
Okay, so yeah, from what I've seen about Planet X, people have been talking about that for a long time. Someone said it could be like a dwarf star or something that's going to create the pole shift. I think a couple years ago, I think they're saying in 2017 even, we might have like the pole shift, and it was Planet X. And there's also people are talking about how that could cause climate change. And Planet X was supposedly Nibiru, which, yes, where our alien overlords live, and it cycles in and out of our solar system. And it's a little bit similar to some of the Scientology beliefs as well, with like the ancient aliens. That's really been popular. If you can't watch the History Channel without seeing ancient aliens now. So
it's if it's on the History Channel, it must be true. Right. The History Channel. Oh wow, and we should probably be careful what we say, but wow, it's amazing how one channel can put out so much BS. Let's put it nicely. So, and then we have Windows X, like I mentioned earlier. And, so is it irony that Steve Jobs or Apple and Windows both put out operating systems about the same time with X? And, of course, what did Windows do a couple years ago? They skipped Windows 9 to come out with Windows 10 or Windows X. So I don't think that was a mistake. Obviously, Windows 8 was a mistake. But I don't think that skipping Windows 9 was a mistake. I think they named it Windows 10 on purpose so that they could be in line with the X plot, just like Elon Musk's SpaceX. And again, you have, so you have the Royal Society, the King, the Rex, the X Club, SpaceX. Elon Musk just inducted into the Royal Society, etc. Thank you, John, for the $5 donation there. Really appreciate it. He says, Jordanius Maximus, a chapter in Blavatsky. So that's good to know. I think I had heard that before. Yeah, so, that's another theosophist thing and angle. So then, of course, he promotes the whole evolution of religion, which I fell into, for instance, in my first book, which I've discussed. Thanks again, Anthony. Wow. Much appreciated. But in my first book, I fell into that and, promoted those same ideas that came out of Theosophy. And, their idea was that, you had Osiris and Mithras and Zarathustra, Krishna, etc. And these were all earlier forms of the Christ logos figure, and that the Christ was an evolutionary thing. And if you think about all the Darwin evolutionary stuff coming out, then all of those ideas sort of all fit together there. And, so anyway, it wasn't evolutionary. It was, in my opinion, when you understand that Tartary was there, and most of the wars over the last several centuries have been against Tartars, then you can see how, they're attacking Tartary. They're attacking the religions of Tartary, the people of Tartary. But Tartary, this massive empire that covered most of the northern hemisphere, if that's there, then that means these religions were contemporary. And, of course, all of these same people covered up the history of Tartary. Now, Giovanni asks if the pharmacratic inquisition is no longer valid. I think there's valid research in it, but I don't adhere to any of that as a whole anymore as the psychedelic foundation of Christianity, because when you understand logos means truth. God is truth. So where do psychedelic drugs fit into that? And I had to, when I wrote that book and did that, we pretty much went through and spot read everything. And when I sat down and actually read it as a book, like books are meant to be read, I could see then how the trivium, which helps you find truth, and then how logos, or the New Testament, teaches you to live in truth. So then, you can't have that. Now, whether or not that applies to other outlying groups and, so-called pagan groups, etc., that's totally different. But I don't think that it applies to Christianity more. So, that's a really good question, Giovanni. I appreciate that. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of valid research in there. And I should probably invert that dang book and show how, it's by that inversion, they use that material to collapse society. So now, we've been inverting it back. And what was in my article, Entheogens, What's in a Name, I really, at the end of that article, I attacked my earlier work in the pharmacratic inquisition and astrotheology and shamanism. It doesn't mean that every citation in there, et cetera, is valid. It just means I didn't get how they were misusing it at that time. I wrote that, in 2003 to 2005, or co-wrote that. So, I was a lot younger, had a lot less information, hadn't realized that most of the scholars I was working with back then in the field of psychedelics were working for the intelligence community. I really got duped into a lot of that stuff. So, anyway, hope that explains that. Giovanni says, totally understand. So, cool. Glad you got that. Did you have any more that you wanted to add, Holly? I didn't realize we're already like 40 minutes in. My goodness.
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the SpaceX program, because I'm wondering if they're just calling it X because it's just like a way that that our shadow government or whatever is, and NASA is funneling money. So SpaceX is deeply involved with the Pentagon and Northrop Grumman, and it seems that SpaceX has been launching. This is according to the sun.co.uk, so you can do some research on your own. But SpaceX has been launching national security payloads, is what they're calling it, which is owned by Northrop Grumman, including a spy satellite for the National Reconnaissance Office and for X-37B space plane for the U.S. Air Force. So I don't really know if we're going to get too much into like the whole idea of NASA and all the occult symbolism that they use constantly, and how they're just basically mocking people all the time. Like NASA, every facet of NASA is pretty much mocking people. And it seems like their latest iteration is the SpaceX program. And I'm just wondering if it's just another way for them to just funnel money and to continue to rebrand. Maybe NASA, people are starting to realize what a waste of money it's been over the years, and perhaps SpaceX is like the new way to bring it to the masses.
Wait a second, because we were able to get to the moon in like the 1950s or 60s or whatever, and for the last 50 years we haven't been able to do any of that stuff. So it could we
lost the technology. The science,
I think what happened is we probably lost Stanley Kubrick, So anyway,
we used to be able to do it on like with the scientific technology and capacity of a calculator.
Yeah, but now with all the modern technology and computers and networking and AI and everything, they can't figure out how to get there apparently. So, from the research that I had done, it really looked like Stanley Kubrick back in the day had probably produced most of the space launch besides in studio, out in the California and or Nevada deserts. But that's that may be too conspiratorial for some. I know, explain why we were able to get there 50 years ago and not now. I think it's just probably a whole lot of nonsense.
I think SpaceX needs like J.J. Abrams, or like they need like a big director on board. I think people are not impressed with the rockets right now. So
yeah, well, SpaceX films can't compare to Kubrick. That's pretty funny.
that was pretty good, guys.
SpaceX
okay,
is a
do you
sham.
want to talk a little bit about? I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, but Generation X.
I guess that would be my generation, Generation X. I don't know it. It seems to me like Generation X was the one where they really finally wiped out the family. Interestingly, a lot of my friends that I went to high school with never grew up. Many of the people that I went to high school with, and they were smart, but none of them, or many of them, didn't get married. Many of them didn't have families, and quite a number of them are dead now. And it's pretty startling when you think of it. It's like, wow, wait a second, what happened to these people? They were just wiped out. But then, after our generation, it pretty much implodes. And of course, they're telling us the population is exploding while it's really on a extreme downfall. But, then you go from our generation, or Generation X, into the millennial generation, and then, and maybe you can speak on that, but they're having very few families, etc. Now, it's gotten even worse.
Well, from what I've seen about what they define Generation X as, is like the first children of divorce, really. So, they're the ones who came after the baby boomers, right? So,
oh, yeah.
So Generation X was like the first generation to start to grow up with the concept of divorced families and separated families on
Right.
a massive scale. And then it basically just compounded from there into the generations afterwards. Like, people haven't rebuilt families. It's
the
only
latchkey generation too. And I
Right.
remember that because, when I was in third grade, kids would go off to latchkey after school. And then, in fact, there's a similar latchkey thing here in town still. But, and then they would be there until 6 o'clock or whatever while both parents were at work. Right. And then, because there was no longer one breadwinner. In fact, now men aren't the breadwinners. Men are now making less money than women. Women are now in the workplace. So they're not at home taking care of the family. They're not at home for the kids to come home to school for, or from school for. And so, now the fathers are being the homemakers, of course, and that always ends in divorce because women get fed up with that. And within about 7 years, most families where the man is at home and the woman is in the workplace, they collapse. And so, so then, it's Generation X followed by the millennials, but it's the complete, they're basically, they come up with these names to mark how they're wiping out society.
Also with I was always under the impression that latchkey is you literally are a kid with a key and you let yourself inside your house because both of your parents are at work or you're only living with one parent, so you come home to an empty house.
There was an organization called Latchkey as well, but you are right on that. I see that.
So also thinking about Generation X, like you've pulled up the Wikipedia there, like they called it the MTV generation as well.
Correct.
So the idea of pop culture really taking over as like the mode of education and also extreme indoctrination. If you break apart the family and then kids are watching television and you have the pop culture, so they talk about 80s music and grunge and hip hop and creating these factions within the teenage generation. And as well, I think Generation X was one of the first generations to really promote the idea of mandatory college, right out of high school. So they haven't really been hit with student loans and the Great Recession that the millennials were strapped with, but it was that idea of getting getting young people right out of high school into college, which I think started to become successful under Generation X.
Now, and you can look at these generations. So let's say we start back in the 1800s and we have large extended families. They're holding it together. Grandma and grandpa or aunts and uncles can watch the kids while somebody's off doing something else. They all contribute to the family economy. And then you have the breakup of that, and then it becomes the nuclear family and the Leave It to Beaver, stage of things, World War II, etc. And so it's the smaller family where the mother is at home and she's taking care of the kids and the father is the breadwinner. And then you go into Generation X and you see that, the mom is at work, the father's at work, the kid lets themselves in, or they go off to a, Boys and Girls Club or latchkey type thing or whatever. Thank you so much, Derek, for the 10 pounds. Woohoo, thank you. That's like $16. Thank you so much. And, and then what we have with the millennials is the transgender, homosexual, your hair is pink, red, green, blue. In my generation, that was what Bozo the Clown wore. And now that's, basically become standard issue. But these people are generally no longer having families, and so then it's not only is it often the father at home or whatever, but it's broken or they don't have any family at all. So what you have is this progression of the destruction of the family narrowing down until it's totally wiped out. And of course, people that don't have families, their generations die off. In Christian terms, they are damned. You have fallen so far that your family is gone, everything is gone, you have no children or future, and your family wipes out. Now, if you have no family, that also supports a heavy socialist government structure, because to take care of all of those people, there is no children and family anymore. There's no extended family where they all took care of everything. Now the government has to come in to cover, to manage all of that. So we can see the progression towards communism, socialism, away from family structure. Of course, they sell this as a good thing. I hear people, argue nonsense that it's a good thing all the time. Families are bad, fathers are bad, all of this stuff. And they promote these ideas through the TV, like, oh goodness, what was that show back in the 90s on, where the father is stupid. The Simpsons is another one where the father is totally incompetent, etc. Just a bumbling idiot. So that's the idea that they want to sell, and people are just at home observing media. So they're no longer, or absorbing media. So they're no longer being productive. They're no longer out learning. They're no longer making families. They're no longer out on the farm, etc. And so John cracks a joke here. Whoa, Jan, check your cis white privilege. And for people who believe in white privilege, I recommend they go check out guys like Jesse Lee Peterson and stuff. He just, destroys that stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say, everyone's talking about Married with Children.
That's the one I wanted to say. Thank you so much. I was going to
jump in and say that, but also, I think you've talked about this a little bit with Gen X and music culture, and someone mentioned Lollapalooza.
I went to Lollapalooza. Yeah, that was our generation.
I was gonna ask. I was like, okay. My guess is you probably went there, and someone said Leary was there as well.
Was he? I don't know. I was at the one in I think it was at Irvine Meadows Amphitheater. And, I think Susie and the Banshees and Living Colour and a bunch of these bands were the bands then. But, yeah, it was to promote pop music. And then what they do is, when I left high school, we were the last generation to actually wear our pants around our waist. And then, when we graduated, which was the class of 90, the next generation that came in, when we were looking at the 11th graders and the 10th graders coming in as we're leaving, the 10th graders were the jailhouse. They were wearing the jailhouse bitch pants, and their pants were halfway down their ass, ready for action. So this was what was coming in as we were leaving high school, And then, it creates, and Hans Utter and I expose this extensively in the Music, Mind Control, and Psychobiology series, but every 10 years, usually on the decade mark, like 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, etc., that's when they shift the music genres so that, that there's a false divide between generations, between family members. Like, the kids come home from school playing the latest crap and the parents are like, what the heck is this? Instead of, creating your own music at home that's outside of their culturally manufactured stuff that they feed us, you're at home creating your own music. But so then what they do is they create these false divisions. And of course, within the schools, the children in the schools break up by the music genres that they're in. So you'll have the punkers, the heavy metalers, the new ager or wavers, the burning people, trance people, and they all put on the uniform of that dress. So it's like a divide and conquer strategy there that they use. Check out put Beach Boulevard in OC. With tweakers and homeless are everywhere. I used to live right down there, interestingly. And, back then it was pretty nice. But if you want to see plenty of homeless people, and I don't want to knock people's misfortune, but, San Bernardino, Riverside, Los Angeles, these areas are having, because of the... Holly takes a deep breath there. Because of the, the liberal politics in Sacramento, mainly Governor Jerry Moonbeam Brown and the communist socialist agendas and everything that they promote, they've wiped out the economy. So now there's no money left for infrastructure because it's gone for all of this communist idealism and the social justice warriors and whatnot. So that's all been... wiped out. So
yep, someone mentioned the Glastonbury Festival, which is in the UK, which was kind of like the other version of that over in Europe. And also, when I think about like Gen X and my friends who are Gen X, I think of the term the archaic revival a lot. So people were mentioning like piercings and tattoos and, communal living and like getting back to your roots, that sort of stuff. Like, I think a lot of my Gen X friends, as they've gotten older, have like started to cover up their tattoos or take out some of their piercings. But I remember, I grew up, after that, but seeing adults, when I was growing up, like people were like heavily tatted, like the cool 20-year-olds and all the piercings. And so it was kind of like this definitely pushed on Gen X, like right before the internet age, really, it was like this archaic revival as well. So.
Your Tears Feed Me says, I remember your very first Gnostic Media. Your intro was electronic music. Those were the days. You've come a long way for the better, sir. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Of course, Holly and I are married now and all of that. So,
I'm not knocking electronic music, by the way.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't gone through our whole Music Mind Control series yet. Maybe she'll question it after that. But, it's... it's the tribal beats. So rather than working, classical forms of music from the 7 classical liberal arts, the trivium and the quadrivium, where music was based on harmony and everything, now we're just getting back to these raw drum beats and repetitive sounds, etc. So the harmony has been lost for this... Discordian stuff that's out there today that's, pushes people further down. It's not just the one thing, it's the music, it's the drugs, it's the breakup of the family, it's, the Generation X, the millennial generation, the this, the that, the food, the vaccines, the whatever. It's all of these things combined. It's the soy, it's the veganism. Most of your body is made out of fat. So, of course, if you're not taking fat, your brain can't function properly on a low-fat diet. So that lowers thinking capacity. It's going to lower, for men, testosterone, for women, estrogen, because as it turns out, testosterone and estrogen are made from cholesterol. And the brain is made of about 77% cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, from meat, butter, and eggs, whereas the bad cholesterol is from grains primarily. And they flipped that, they inverted that to tell us that the opposite was true, that the grains was the good stuff and the meat, butter, eggs, etc. was the bad stuff. It's exactly the opposite. And when you understand ketosis and the ketogenic diet, you get that stuff. Let's see. Oh, well, anyway, just reading people's notes here. Did you have something you wanted to jump in there?
Oh, well, I was kind of hoping to tie it back to X for a minute here.
Go for it.
But no, I was hoping we would, but I don't know. I guess that's it. So.
Well, I mean, it's all X. It's all eugenics for them. It's all dysgenics for us. Pushing us down, wiping us out, killing off the population. You know, they're on the fast track now because all of this stuff is being exposed fairly quickly, and people are seeing it more and more all the time. Windhammer says margarine is a poison. That is correct. People should only be using grass-fed butter. You know, if you can't get that, use regular butter, but margarine and I can't believe it's not whatever. That stuff is not the real stuff. It's plastic. And so that's where all of the trans fats come from. Just because it says 0 trans fats on the package, all that means is that there's less than 1 gram per serving. So they're allowed to put 0 on the package. It doesn't mean that there's no trans fats in there. It just means that, they've paid the American Heart Association enough, to promote this idea, and and that the animal fats are bad. Margarine is good, all of this stuff. But soy mouth is a condition where soy boys, when photographed, involuntarily have their mouth agape, almost unhinged. That is very funny. I don't know if that's true. I'll have to take a drive through Orange County. Orange County used to be very conservative. Now it's very unhinged liberal. But yeah, it'd be interesting to go through there. One thing that's and then you see everybody wearing these atrocious tapered tight pants now, the guys, and it's just absolutely wow. But anyway, I don't know. We mentioned X-rated earlier, X-rays, X-Factor, Xbox, OS X, Windows X, X marks the spot, X for signature, X for the Roman numeral 10, X for Christ, X for Rex, the king, SpaceX, X Club, etc. These are all key things, but they all tie back, in my opinion, and probably Holly's as well. Kiss, X's and O's, hugs and kisses. That's another one for sure. And the O means something entirely other, and I'll skip it for now. But pants. What
X,
is?
Someone said X equals poison, which is a good point as well.
Oh yeah, triple X is poison. That's correct. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, someone mentioned the rapper Extension, who was recently murdered, and he made videos recently saying, if I get sacrificed, at least I did it for the music and this and that, and that's right around, not to get too far into it, but it's he got murdered pretty close to, June 21st, the equinox. So just, some of the real conspiracy theorists out there reporting on that. So, yeah.
Correct. Well, I think I'm about out of information. Are you ready to wrap it up here?
Yeah, I think that's good. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the super chats.
Thanks for the super chats and donations. I don't know if any of you mailed any. My email is closed. Thanks also to those of you who are supporting us on Patreon. We really appreciate any and all support, and we'd like to try to get that Patreon growing as well. So thank you, everyone. And hopefully this brings a little bit of understanding to, some of this X nonsense going on out there that we keep hearing about. Maybe, for those who catch this show, it just gives a little bit more understanding. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Bye.